Hello, and welcome to the second webinar in our three-part series on Java and regulatory compliance, what you need to know. Today, we'll be focusing on the Asia-Pacific regulatory and legislative compliance for Java apps. And today, I am joined by Simon Ritter, our Deputy CTO and Java champion. Say hello, Simon.
Hello, and welcome to this webinar.
And my name is Dana Crane. I'm one of the product marketing directors here at Azul. A couple of housekeeping things before we start. There will be a recording of this video available for everybody who registered. And if you've got any questions along the way, please just pop open the Q&A panel, enter your question there. We will save some time at the end of the webinar to answer your questions. Let's dive right in. Our agenda here is we're going to be talking about some of the key concerns that we've heard from customers, both when it comes to moving from Oracle to Azul, and also what it means for compliance as well when they do that. We'll talk a little bit about the regulatory landscape, look into some of the regulations and legislations in the Asia-Pacific region. And then we'll wrap up talking about some of the Azul advantages that you can gain, both when it comes to regulatory compliance and when it comes to moving from Oracle to Azul. So let's kick off about some of the Oracle Java concerns that we hear typically from our customers. A couple of years ago, Oracle introduced a new pricing metric, and that was based on employee count. It was designed originally just to simplify their pricing model. It was just based on the number of employees, easy enough to count. But employees is actually a very broad term in Oracle's meaning. What they include can mean students for universities or other educational institutions. It could include janitorial staff who never use a Java application. It could include temporary workers. It could include consultants, and many, many more. As a result, what we end up seeing is that there's a lot of companies who are being hit with multi-million-dollar increases in their yearly fees. And all this at a time when Oracle is dropping older technologies from their support program, and the latest being JavaFX on Java 8. So we conducted a survey earlier this year to understand what kind of impact this is having on companies out there. And what we see is that companies with large Java estates, out of all those responding, 88% of them were more than willing to make the move from Oracle to an OpenJDK solution. In other words, almost everybody is feeling the negative impact of these changes that Oracle's making. But when enterprises are considering making that move away from Oracle, some of the key questions always come up. They usually boil down to something like, can I really just swap out Oracle for Azul? And that answer, of course, is yes, because we use Oracle's own technology compatibility kit. That's the TCK. And it contains tens of thousands of tests that we run against our OpenJDK builds to ensure that we're compatible with Oracle deployments. There are some extremely rare corner cases, typically older legacy desktop applications that might have an issue, but we've always been able to fix those. And as a result, we have a 100% success rate converting Oracle users to Azul. Now, when it comes to compliance, there are some key issues that always come up, mainly around industry regulations that involve security requirements, patching requirements, availability, incident response, and a few others. We'll talk some more in depth about those in the next section. But for now, let's talk a little bit about what we see in the Asia-Pacific region when it comes to regulatory trends. The topmost one that we see right now revolves around data protection. And data protection is really just focused on personal information and how it's stored. Singapore's Personal Data Protection Act, or PDPA, it's very similar to less restrictive Western regulations like GDPR. But what we've seen recently is that countries like China and Vietnam are introducing much more restrictive personal information protection laws, and these require or can require government approval or even security assessments before you can share personal information across borders. And for marketers, they also require explicit opt-in consent for the marketing. Now, when it comes to cybersecurity, Asia Pacific industries, rightly or wrongly, they're seen as having weaker security protections than Western businesses. And that makes them a real target for bad actors. One of the big problems here that we see is that there's no central authority to coordinate regulations like there is in Europe. So, for example, Hong Kong is finally proposing to make data breach notifications mandatory, just like in Singapore, Malaysia, and Australia. That's a good sign because sharing breach information is really key since today's AI-driven tools are automating the search and exploitation of known vulnerabilities. And that makes it easier than ever for bad actors to breach organizations that don't keep up with the kind of security updates that are mandatory. In contrast, when it comes to financial regulations, what we're seeing is a little bit of more homogeneity. What we're seeing is things like anti-money laundering laws, like the one that came into effect in China on January 1st, aligning much more closely to global standards. And that's the kind of trend we like to see. It makes it easier for all regions to do business across the globe. So let's dig in a little bit more into some specific regulations in some of the different countries in the Asia Pacific region. Simon, you want to kick us off?
Yes, thank you. So, first one that we're going to look at here is obviously in Singapore in the financial industry sector, and one of the groups which looks after the sort of regulation and compliance there is the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Clearly, that's very much addressing the financial industry side of things. And what they deal with there is in terms of actually providing guidelines and so on that you need to follow is around what they call technology risk management. And I guess the clue is in the name. It's risk management for technology. And there are several things that you need to look at in terms of that. Obviously, there's the situation where when you've got security patches that come out, they must be applied promptly. And then they must also be tested for compatibility. And I think that the key thing that we need to understand from the point of view of Java specifically in this case is that when we have updates, which we have 4 times a year, they come from Oracle in 2 forms. So you have what's called the CPU and the PSU. CPU, critical patch updates, only the security patches. And then the PSU or patch set update is the full update, security patches, bug fixes, anything else. And the key part of that is that because the patch set update is big, can potentially contain 2, 3, 400 changes, when it comes to testing for compatibility with your applications, there's a higher chance that something that is included as a change might affect the stability of your application. And we've actually seen this several times in the past where a change that's been included has broken certain applications. Go back to 2022. As an example, there was an update that broke things like Hadoop Cluster, Solr, and Lucene. So when it comes to managing these guidelines and actually complying with them, what you really need is that ability to deploy just the security patches, which has the minimum number of changes. And we've never seen a situation where the CPU has affected the stability of big applications or applications that we know about. So obviously, Oracle provide both of those, and Azul does as well. And we'll talk more about that when we come back to the Azul advantage later on. So that's one big thing in terms of the financial industry in Singapore.
All right. Let me talk a little bit about Australia instead. So, security is a real key focus right now for the Australian government, and they have a cybersecurity center and they put forth a bunch of regulations, what they term their Essential Eight. Again, there's a number of different regulations put forth by the Essential Eight, but let's talk about just the ones that apply to your Java estate. And specifically, I want to focus in on one key requirement that we've run across in the field, and it can be extremely difficult for companies to comply with, and that's patching high-risk vulnerabilities within 48 hours. Now, that's an exceptionally difficult timeline to meet even in the best of times. Most vendors, third-party vendors, open source vendors, they won't be able to provide a patch in as little as 2 days. It usually takes them up to a week to provide a patch. It's going to be very difficult to meet that 48-hour deadline in that case. For Java specifically, most of the vulnerabilities, though, they come to light on a quarterly basis. On the same day that Oracle provides a patch for them, they also publish the vulnerabilities that are being covered by the patch. Now, there are some OpenJDK vendors who may take another day or maybe 3 days after Oracle releases their patch to make their quarterly patch available. That means you could miss this 48-hour window, which would put you out of compliance. But Azul, we have a very strict SLA, which means we've always released our quarterly patches on the same day as Oracle. That gives you a little bit of a leg up. But what about zero-day vulnerabilities? Well, most OpenJDK vendors do not provide out-of-cycle patches like Oracle and Azul do. So if you're hit with a zero-day vulnerability that you have to close within 48 hours, that means you're probably going to be out of compliance for up to 3 months while you're waiting for that quarterly patch to address it. With Oracle and also with Azul, you can get one of the out-of-cycle patch updates from us and be able to apply that quickly and hopefully try and make that 48-hour window.
Yes, and so looking at another situation in terms of the Australian market, what we're looking at here is the Australian Critical Industries Group and Security of Critical Infrastructure Act. So that's another thing. What's interesting here is that they look at, again, it's this idea of being able to address things quickly. So within 12 hours after you become aware of a critical cybersecurity incident, you need to be able to deal with that and at least start doing things with that. And this is where we get into the difference between supported software and unsupported software. If there's a critical cybersecurity incident and you need help with that from the perspective of the JDK and understanding what vulnerabilities might have been used and what you might be exposed to, if you're running on unsupported software, then you've got nobody to talk to, nobody to help you in terms of identifying what might be the cause of that security vulnerability or security breach. With Azul, you have support for your software, and that means you have our support organization. We can help you with that in terms of identifying what particular vulnerability might have been the source of the breach. And so you can use that, backing up the information that you're going to be able to provide to maintain your compliance within this. And we have, again, as Dana said, we have very good, well-defined SLAs on this, and we will respond to you within 1 hour. If you raise a support call, we will respond within 1 hour to acknowledge the fact that you have raised the support ticket, and then we will do our utmost after that to help you as quickly as possible. So the SLA is to respond within 1 hour. Can't guarantee to fix any problems within 1 hour, but after that, our team will start working on that and helping you through the process. So having supported software in a situation like this where you've got these kinds of regulations is going to be absolutely critical to maintaining your compliance.
Talk a little bit about PCI DSS. So if you're in the retail industry or even in the e-tail industry in Asia Pacific or anywhere around the world, since this is really a global regulation, you're probably being subject to PCI audits and reviews. And if you've got any legacy Java technology anywhere in your credit card processing stream, or even when you're storing PANs, you've got to have commercial support for it in order to comply with the patching mandates. So EOL technology from Java includes things like Java 6, Java 7, older legacy stuff like Java Web Start or Java Applets. All of these things might be in your credit card processing stream. Without the ability to get a patch and apply it, you could be failing a PCI audit. Or even when you're trying to get PCI accreditation, you may fail. And that can mean losing the ability to process credit cards. That can mean delaying accreditation for up to 6 months, both of which could make or break your business. And the other thing to think about here is if a zero-day breach occurs, like we mentioned before, you'll need access to those out-of-cycle patches so that you can quickly patch that zero-day breach. And again, the only companies that provide out-of-cycle patches are Azul and Oracle. So keep that in mind if you're working with PCI DSS and you need access to patches for older technologies. And with that, I think we'll dive into some of the how Azul can help you guys when it comes to establishing the regulatory compliance and getting off Oracle to begin with. I'm going to turn it over to Simon.
Okay, great, thanks. Yes, so let's start by looking at the issue of closing the governance gap, and this is where we've got the distinction between the reality and what is the ideal, and how having supported software, as we've already sort of talked about, can allow you to address that gap in what you're supposed to do and what you're actually doing at the moment. So what we've got here is a couple of things in terms of the details. So patch management, we've talked about this, is that Java has regularly scheduled updates. We have them 4 times a year, and they come out in January, April, July, and October. Now, when those come out, depending on what security vulnerabilities are in those patches, then you need to think about how quickly you want to patch your systems to address those vulnerabilities. For example, if there's only a few low-grade vulnerabilities, you may be able to wait longer. But if there's critical vulnerabilities, you really want to be getting that patch deployed literally as quickly as possible. And we've seen in terms of the governance and the regulations, it could be as little as 48 hours that you have in order to deploy those patches. But the reality is that 60% of companies don't patch systems on a regular basis. Even though the patches are made available, they don't patch them on a regular basis. And that's something where, again, if you want to maintain that compliance, you're going to have to do that. Having the ability to have those patches available as quickly as possible is going to be critical to being able to do that. Secondly is around incident reporting and how long it takes to remediate processes and the remediation process that's in place. And again, if you look at what companies do, average remediation is somewhere in the region of 60 to 150 days. That's quite a long time. Even critical vulnerabilities, and I've seen this myself in some companies where we've been talking to them about the security situation and how we can help them with making those updates available more quickly, that they say that they just don't have things in place to be able to address the deployment of these updates as quickly as they really should. And so even with critical vulnerabilities, it can take them days or even weeks to do that. So again, having the access to these things as quickly as possible will help when it comes to changing the way that you do your development, your operations, so that you can get within compliance and you can deploy these updates and patches as quickly as possible. When we look at the reality of what this means from a exposure point of view, what we've put here is how long it potentially takes for somebody to exploit a vulnerability. We only need to go back sort of 6 years, and we can see there that the mean time to exploit a vulnerability back in 2019 was 22 days, so a little over 3 weeks. So you could say to yourself, well, if it's going to take several days, several weeks even before people can develop exploits for these vulnerabilities, does it really matter too much if we don't develop an exploit straight away, or we don't actually deploy the patches straight away? And so you could argue that. But the reality is that just in the last year, what we've seen is that this has changed completely. That the mean time to develop an exploit now can be as little as 20 minutes. So you really do have to have the ability to deploy these patches as quickly as possible. One thing I will say about that is this is where we're seeing the use of AI technologies used not so much in a good way where we can use them to help us with different tasks, but people actually using them to develop exploits more quickly so that they can avoid it, like the lengthy work that's required, and they can bring that time down to as little as 20 minutes for an exploit. So we move on to the next slide. How can we help? Well, obviously, what we're doing is providing you with an identical set of products in terms of the support and the maintenance that you get from Oracle. So there really is no difference from that. And in fact, it's even better. When we say it's exactly the same, then we provide all of the updates that come out for Java at the same time that Oracle do. So you've got those quarterly updates. If there is a 0-day vulnerability that occurs, if there's the requirement for an out of bounds patch, then we will deliver that again at the same time. one of the things that's very helpful for us is that we're part of what's called the OpenJDK vulnerability group. So we are helping Oracle and people like IBM and Red Hat and so on to develop the security patches before they're released as part of an update. That gives us information and the ability to see what those patches are as they're being developed, because we're actually helping to develop them. And then we're able to take those patches and backport them to older versions, do all of that work, do all of the builds, and importantly, do all of the testing before the update from Oracle comes out. Once the update from Oracle comes out, as Dana rightly said, we're allowed to release ours, and we come out with ours very, very quickly. So we do have an SLA for how quickly we come out with that, which is 48 hours. That's how the maximum time that we say that we will take to deliver an update. What we've actually had, if we look at the history of how we've delivered updates, since Oracle stopped providing free updates to JDK back in 2019, we've had our security updates available to our customers within 1 hour. So even with the best will in the world, even with a 20-minute ability to develop an exploit, there just isn't time for people to develop that and then figure out where to use it before you have a chance to actually deploy the update to your systems. So that means that you've got the maximum level of security. Similarly, as I said, we provide both the CPU and the PSU, which is identical to Oracle, so there's no difference there. That's different to other distributions of OpenJDK. Oracle and Azul are literally the only two distributions that provide both of those. All the others provide just the PSU, so just the big one. As I said, out-of-cycle patches, we have our 24/7/365 global technical support. Already mentioned that in terms of the ability for somebody to call who can help you with an issue, whether it's security related or whether it's some stability related issue with the JDK. Then we can root cause that. We can then develop a fix independently for your application, get you up and running. We will provide an update separate to the standard ones that can get you up and running again, and then we'll upstream any changes that we require for that into the OpenJDK project so that we're not maintaining a fork of OpenJDK specifically for your application. When it comes to the older versions of Java, yes, we go all the way back to JDK 6 and JDK 7. So because we are able to see the security patches, like I said, we can backport those where applicable all the way through to JDK 6. And we have support for legacy technologies like applets and JWA, Java Web Start. And if we look at the next slide, what this shows us is the reality of ignoring the problem of security. Now, you might be running some Java 6 and some Java 7, and you think to yourself, yeah, well, we haven't updated it for a long time now. We updated it the last time Oracle gave us a free patch to that, and we haven't bothered doing anything since then. But nothing's happened with it, so we're okay. So it'll be fine. We'll just keep that running and everything is okay. The reality, however, is that if we look at these bar charts here, what you're seeing is the number of vulnerabilities that are being reported against both Java 6 and Java 7 every quarter. And the reason is because, of course, they may not be reported directly against Java 6 and Java 7, but because of the commonality of the code in Java 6 with Java 8, Java 11, and so on, much of the code is the same. Those vulnerabilities are still being identified, and they still apply to JDK 6 and JDK 7. So there are a large number of vulnerabilities that have been discovered since free updates stopped, and you will be exposed to all of those. And quite a large number of those are actual critical vulnerabilities. So you do need to think very, very carefully if you're running these older versions, are you really safe from people attacking your systems? And if we move on to the next slide, talking about legacy technologies, and I mentioned this with the comparison between Azul and Oracle. What's important here is that we're dealing with things which are included in the Oracle JDK, but are not part of the open source Java, so not part of OpenJDK. Specifically, we're talking about Java Web Start, and we're talking about applets. And we do still have a lot of people who are using those in production. Now, when it comes to migrating away from Oracle, because these were included in the Oracle JDK, but not in the open source Java, if you go to just a standard distribution of OpenJDK, you won't have these things available. What we've done to enable our customers to continue using them with, again, the maximum level of security, maximum level of stability, is to provide alternatives which will do the same thing, even though they're not built from the same source. In the case of Java Web Start, we have a project that's an open source one called ICT Web. And we've taken that source code, we've contributed to it in terms of changes to make it work in a better way, as we've discovered certain things, specifically from a configuration point of view, where we've had to make minor changes to get applications to work with ICT Web versus Java Web Start. On the applet side of things, we can allow applets to run through the browser and use the underlying JDK from Azul, so that you're running your applets with the maximum level of security, again, because you've got all the security patches and bug fixes in the underlying JDK. Oracle no longer support applets. They no longer support the browser plugin. They no longer support Java Web Start. So what you're getting here is, again, the maximum level of security for these much older technologies. And I think, Dana, we were talking about this before we did the presentation. You had an interesting story that you told me about from a customer.
Yeah. I was talking to a customer just the other week, and when it comes to that governance gap, this is a great example. They had thousands of desktops, and once a week they would run their security scan, and that would send off security alarms like nobody's business. That was because they did not have access to these older tech patches for these older desktop technologies. That meant that they were out of compliance. And eventually they just turned off all these alarms, turned off all these scans. They realized they were out of compliance and they needed to do something about it. That's when they came to us to get those kinds of patches. Once we converted them over from Oracle to us, gave them the patches, turned back on their security alarms, everything was silent. So that's a key way to think of that governance gap. It may be that you just need the right patches from the right vendor and everything can get realigned.
Great. Yeah, last thing to talk about is with the big kind of switch to using microservices nowadays, what we see is the issue of deploying containers. And because we have containers where you can download container images from different places on the web, there's a real issue around supply chain security. This has become something of a sort of hot topic more recently. And what we've done here is to look at how we can provide better ways of doing that. So we actually announced a partnership that we're doing with ChainGuard, who provide containers that have the security sort of checks built in, and so hardened containers is what we call them. And so we've done a partnership with them so that we can provide the JDK as part of that. So all of it comes in a hardened container, and you're looking at a high level of security. Same thing with Rapid Thought, so we can have better security around the containers on there, focus on cybersecurity and so on. So those are all the things that I wanted to talk about here. I think if I pass it back to you, Dana, maybe
Yeah.
I can see we've got any questions.
Right. Let's remind you guys, just pop open that Q&A panel. If you have a question, go ahead, type it in now. We will try and address it. We already have a question available for us. It says, my industry has regulations around data availability and system availability. How can Azul help here?
Yeah, so I think this kind of comes back to really two things. One is the ability to deploy patches very quickly, so that SLA, the guarantee that you have that patches will be available very, very quickly after Oracle release theirs. So you've got that continuity and the ability to maintain that security. But I think the other thing that's very critical here, if you want to guarantee the maximum possible uptime, is that distinction between having just the full update and having both the CPU and the PSU. That again comes back to what I said, which is that sometimes with so many changes being included in the PSU, we see situations where something that's a bug fix for one bug actually introduces another bug. And if you're thinking about wider used applications, I quoted the examples of Hadoop cluster, Solar, and Lucene. If a patch affects something like that, you will see people act quickly, and the OpenJDK will try and find a solution to that problem, maybe back out a patch or something like that, and generate a new update fairly quickly. So you may be waiting only a few days. But the problem comes if you're working with an application that you've developed yourself, and that application gets affected by some very small esoteric change that happens in a patch, and that only affects your application. If you're not running on supported software, you're in a very difficult situation, because if you don't have access to the CPU, you can only deploy the PSU, but the PSU will stop your application from working because of this change. Therefore, you say, well, okay, I won't deploy the PSU, but then you're out of compliance because you're not addressing security vulnerabilities that have been addressed in that particular update. And you don't know how long that could be, because if it's only affecting your application, quite possibly, then you may have to wait an indeterminate amount of time before somebody fixes that particular problem. With a support contract with Azul, then you have access to our support team. We can root cause that. Firstly, you've got access to the CPU as well as the PSU, so you can deploy that quickly to get your systems compliant with security patches. But then we can also figure out what the problem is that was causing your application to stop, and then address that, and again, upstream that so that we can make that change, get your applications running again, and then you can resync on the next update with the knowledge that your bug has been fixed now. So I think that's really the very important thing, is both the speed of delivery of the patches and the fact that we can provide both the CPU and the PSU.